Hello! Hey, besties. How are you doing today? So good to see you. It's your boy, Mix Mercury, the Astro Himbo. Welcome to today's live. I'm so tired. And I always say I'm not going to be on here very long, but then I end up being on here for an hour and a half. So I'm not even going to say that. I'm just going to let you know that I'm feeling a little tired today. It's been a long week. And I'm really annoyed about a lot of things, particularly dealing with money. It's like some quick karma came around for me talking about the eighth house yesterday and got slapped with a surprise bill from the dentist. Love that for me. So today's lament, however, is slightly different, related in a roundabout way by sextile. Yesterday's rant was about the eighth house. Today's rant will be about the sixth house. I have sixth house placements as well. Personally, showing up with Venus and Jupiter in sidereal Scorpio in the sixth house. And I am currently in a sixth house perfection at 29 years young. I believe, is it 16? 17 is also a sixth house year. I think it's 17. That's my guess. And yeah, because if 19 is an eighth house year, 17, 19, 18, 17 would be sixth house. And yeah, there are other ages that would be associated with the sixth house that I don't remember off the top of my head. I know some people in the chat might know. If you want to drop that in there and save me some trouble, that would be great. But yeah, let's get into it. I asked at the beginning of the stream, whoever showed up in the chat early, if you would please drop some sixth house placements in the chat. And so far we got the moon. Love a sixth house moon. We got the south node, Ketu, in Pisces in the sixth house, at least in tropical. And then we got a sixth house north node in sidereal as well. So that's what we are chatting about today. So I will begin same way that I did yesterday with hold on one second. I will begin today with where am I? Still getting used to StreamYard, y'all. Getting rid of my stream name. Okay. This is going to be a good chat. I'm glad that you feel optimistic about it. I feel a little bit all over the place and I could use a nap. So maybe that will make it fun. Going to open up my astrotherapy journal guidebook that has a few little keywords for our sixth house. Today we are looking at the phrase I engage, along with work and coworkers, duties, obligations, health, illness, diagnoses, and I'm going to add another one, pets, because pets are also in the sixth house. And I don't think pets get enough credit for being in the sixth house. So that is what we are talking about today. So why do I have I engage in quotations in the astrotherapy guidebook? Well, I think about the sixth house as somewhere that we engage with the world around us. It is a personal house, as far as houses 1 through 6 being more personal houses or more introspective houses, if you will. But there's a way that the sixth house represents like areas of life that we directly have to engage with or engage in, such as the workplace, such as our daily routines, and dealing with our own health and illnesses and diagnoses and things like that. Also engaging with other people in terms of coworkers, like I said, or clients, if you see clients, or being of service to other people. And usually being of service, working service-oriented jobs, customer service and things like that are also things I tend to see associated with the sixth house. So it's a very engaging house. I also call it the house of engagement because I think of the 12th house, its opposing house, as a place where we withdraw or pull away from everyone else, and somewhere that we tend to isolate or find solitude or retreat a little bit more. So working with that theory, that dynamic for now, and just kind of seeing where it takes me as I'm observing these placements and experiencing them myself. Um, the sixth house is also somewhere where I believe Mars enjoys being. It is also the natural house of Virgo, if you believe in natural houses. I don't do that as much, but some people like that. So that's where some of these ideas of like routine and um, rituals falls into place. And then I also think about, like we said, pets being in the sixth house, something that you take care of and that you have to, um, not have to, but somewhere that you might be involved with a lot of pets. And what else? What else? What else? I'm curious if y'all have any sixth house keywords that I haven't mentioned that maybe you think about whenever you're dealing with the sixth house. So yeah, um, starting with myself as an example, of course. Like I said, I have Venus and Jupiter and Scorpio in the sixth house. I am somebody who is always, I was gonna curse, somebody who's always working. Always working. Just today, I woke up early. I had to drive across town. My sixth house is ruled by Mars in the third house. Had to drive across town to go pick up some gift cards for the sex ed classes that I sat through earlier this week for a $75 gift card because that's how desperate we are these days. And I do want to circle back and talk about that one of these lives as well, because that was also interesting. But drove across town, had to pick up some gift cards, went for a walk, and then did some deliveries for the catering delivery that I talk about, or that I've mentioned that I do work with. Um, and then came home and mostly I've been able to relax today, but here I am on live as well. Um, I work I technically work 3 different jobs right now. So there's my self-employment, being an astrologer, an astrotherapist, and relationship coach. There is the delivery service work that I do, and then there's also the in-person part-time job that I do. Um, I work at a community college in the testing center, student testing center. So all customer service oriented jobs. I've always worked customer service, whether that was in the restaurant industry or in the retail industry or what other jobs have I done? I've done a lot of pet sitting. We talked about sixth house being pet. I in 2018, especially 2018, 2019, was like always pet sitting and house sitting for somebody or walking dogs on WAG. That was like my side gig while I was also working at a yoga studio as a yoga teacher. So I love dogs. Dogs love me. I love pets. Usually, sixth house transits for me do bring things coming up with my pets, usually having to spend money on them that I don't want to spend, which can be very frustrating. I see in the chat here somebody mentioned illness, which was on my list. Yes, that they said specifically would love to talk about the disability part if that's relevant or makes sense. And yeah, something else about the sixth house and what it rules is digestion or the digestive system, the small intestine, because I believe the eighth house is large intestine and like colon and bowels. So sixth house being like digestion, digestive organs, and sometimes tummy troubles. Like usually I call the sixth house girlies like the IBS baddies. Definitely guilty. IBS digestion issues over here. Somebody who always needs a good probiotic bubbly drink or some chamomile tea to calm the nerves. Definitely that. Sometimes I'm not 100% on this, but chronic illnesses can be in the sixth house because those are usually things you have to deal with on a regular basis, something that you have to reckon with regularly, something you have to keep up with regularly, whether that's taking supplements or um, some kind of a routine that you have around your physical health. Whereas I see more mental illnesses as kind of a 12th house thing, sometimes 8th house, just depending on the mental illness that we're referencing. Um, what else? What else? Yeah, and also caretakers. Caretakers usually have sixth house placements. It kind of goes with the whole service oriented thing that I was just mentioning. Usually, planets that you have in the sixth house can note being a caretaker for someone else. So I see moon in the sixth house sometimes can look like being a caretaker for your mother or your grandmother. I haven't seen very many sixth house sons, but I wouldn't be surprised if sixth house sons are taking care of their father or grandfather often, or some of the men in their lives, husbands, things like that. Usually, if there's overlap with the seventh house and the sixth house, that can look like being a caretaker to a partner or chronically ill partner sometimes, or you relying on a partner, I guess maybe more eighth house and seventh house, sixth house dynamics, but can also be you relying on a partner dealing with chronic illness or disability in some kind. Um, what else? What else? Yeah, the sixth house, it's not a comfy house. Just much like the eighth house, much like the 12th house, these are houses that are antagonistic to the first house, which is why I kind of want to talk about them. I think they are houses that do get a bad rep and that people do tend to feel some anxiety around whenever they know they're going to be dealing with it. I definitely do personally. And so I'll explain a little bit why it's antagonistic to the first house. The first house and the sixth house, similar to the first and the eighth house, like we talked about yesterday, have a relationship by house called quincunx. So it's not exactly an opposition, but it's also not a trine like it would be first to the fifth house or the opposition first to the seventh house. Kind of an awkward place to be. Um, it's a place where these two signs that occupy these two houses usually don't have much in common. They don't have anything in common by modality. They don't have anything in common by element. And they don't aspect each other directly either. So they have a hard time understanding each other. And if you've been in relationships with somebody who has a placement in the sixth house from yours, if you're doing derived houses, usually those are two houses that just don't really understand each other, don't really relate to each other very well. So, for example, again, if I have Gemini rising and I have the moon in the first house, Gemini themes, if I'm using the Divination for Liberation Wounds and Gifts model, right? So this is something that a Sidereal Maven put into words on their Patreon once. And it was about how the sixth house, or rather the first house, I think, undermines the gift of the sixth house. Did I say that right? The first house undermines the gift of the sixth house. So if we're using Gemini as the example, Gemini, very knowledgeable, very open and curious, very talkative, and also can be kind of gullible. They tend to fall for things, sometimes taking things and people and their words at face value, taking information at face value. And so this can lead to, like I said, some gullibility and also to a lot of patronizing, like people just not taking Gemini very seriously, being unwilling to listen to Gemini, or um, maybe not trusting Gemini for whatever reason. So the quincunx undermining kind of relationship that Gemini would have with Scorpio is that Scorpio cares a little bit more about autonomy and bodily autonomy, especially, but um, emotional autonomy and emotional differences. Scorpio is more interested in being able to feel their feelings, feel how they feel without being swayed by how other people feel, or ideally not being affected by how other people feel if they can manage it, because they just want to feel their own feelings. And without that, Scorpio can self-isolate, wanting to get away from everyone else, wanting to feel their own feelings by themselves, or deal with things and handle things by themselves, maybe without asking for help or relying on other people. We're talking like a Mercury ruled sign versus a Mars ruled sign, which Scorpio is, and an air ruled sign, um, which is different than a water ruled sign. So air ruled sign with Gemini, water ruled sign with Scorpio. Air and water don't really get along. Um, and Mercury and Mars, they're kind of neutral, kind of indifferent towards each other, I would say. But I think Mars is a little bit more self-protective, and so therefore a little bit more distant and maybe a little bit less open. a little bit less open minded sometimes, and a little bit more fearful in general. Whereas Mercury tends to be a little bit more neutral, a little bit more open. So the gift that Scorpio has around, we'll say, emotional autonomy is something that Gemini's coping strategy of, is it coping strategy? Gullibility of just like taking things at face value. Sometimes those can kind of undermine each other in the sense that Scorpio maybe wouldn't just fall for things as easily. Scorpio is probably going to be a little bit more suspicious, usually known for our suspicion, unfortunately, and the struggle to trust, whether that's trust that will be accepted or heard for how we're feeling, or that we will be accepted in some kind of a way. And so there's something about being a little bit too open to everyone, taking people at face value, maybe listening and learning from just anybody that's not always authentic or not always the truth of how Scorpio feels. So there's like the inability maybe to truly speak your mind because you're worried about being alienated from other people. There can be fear around there can be fear around, yeah, expressing yourself around people if you don't think that they're going to actually hear you out or take you seriously. So in some ways, like Scorpio self-isolation kind of gets in the way of Gemini's ability to be more open-minded and knowledgeable and things like that. If you're afraid to learn, if you're afraid to be open, then you can't learn new things. So different things like that, right? Curious for you how you feel the relationship between your first house and sixth house placements are. If you want to throw it in the chat, what are some ways that maybe your first house sign, whatever it is, has a weird relationship with the sign in the sixth house? And I can definitely throw some thoughts out there too, depending on what y'all say in the chat. If I speak just personally without necessarily thinking in the technical sense, um, something that I've experienced a lot is, so for context, like my fifth and 12th house ruler, Venus, is in the sixth house. And then my 10th and 7th house ruler is also in the sixth house. They're very conjunct each other. Jupiter is the other one. So Jupiter in Scorpio is like, I struggle to trust my own emotions, that they're real, that they're valid, and that I can express them to other people without experiencing like alienation or shame or judgment from them. I also worry about being judged for my thoughts and my beliefs, especially because where I grew up, I was in the minority in, definitely in all of the identity ways, but also in the religious sense or in the political sense or whatever it was. So I was always afraid to speak my mind for fear that people would judge me or that my beliefs and opinions would be unpopular. That's something that still haunts me today, and why it's hard for me to really stand on business sometimes, especially in relationships. So then you bring Venus into it. Venus and Scorpio, something Samaje said, if I can remember correctly, and I'm paraphrasing, so if I get it wrong, Samaje, I see you in the chat. Hey, bestie, you are more than welcome to correct me. But Samaje mentioned something about Venus in Scorpio feeling like they are having to mask or perform feelings that aren't authentic to them. And so I've definitely had to do a lot of that, especially in the workplace. One, because the workplace generally wants the employees to conform to the workplace. You're not meant to express yourself and your individuality at work as much as you are representing the job. So I have often been in jobs where I was the only person like me just because of the city or town that I was working in. The only black person, the only queer person, maybe the only left leaning person or whatever it is. And then um, feeling like, let me get comfortable in this chair, feeling like I always had these kind of enmeshed relationships to some extent with my bosses, or feeling like my bosses throughout the years, in any when whatever dynamic it is, if I'm working with a boss or a mentor, that the emotional boundaries were really blurry, and so I couldn't tell if it was hard for me to tell like what was okay or when it was okay to assert a boundary versus maybe when it was okay to share certain things or to be a certain level of closeness. Like, are we friends or are you my boss? What are the power dynamics here? It would get very blurry, and that was always something that made me really uncomfortable. So these are all the things from the Scorpio side, and a lot of that I'm experiencing internally. I'm not like verbalizing because of the power dynamics and all of the other things going on. But then as a Gemini, there's also the part of me that went into the job just kind of observing what everybody else was doing and kind of um, assuming maybe that certain jobs or certain bosses, coworkers, or whatever were safe because they were nice to me up front, and the way that they were treating me was, just a reflection of them being cool and kind, when in reality maybe they were manipulating me or wanted something from me, and I just kind of didn't protect myself and have very strong boundaries because I just assumed that, they were cool or whatever it was. So there's a little bit of the gullibility in that sense, that I go into it with an open mind and kind of trusting everybody and thinking that they have my best interest in mind, when in reality there was a lot of like fetishizing going on. There was a lot of like I said, emotional enmeshment going on, and weird identity power struggles and things like that with authority figures that made it kind of hard for me to advocate for myself in a lot of situations. So, one example of how I think, even in just like the general capitalistic sense, like work the way that we do it in capitalism and being tied to an employer. So, to the point that like all of your needs and all of your benefits and everything are tied to that job, kind of makes you give up some autonomy in a way. Yeah, it's very antagonistic to the first house. You can't really be your full self at work. And not that you necessarily need to be your full self at work. I don't think that's always wise either, because essentially you are there to serve a particular purpose and do a particular job. Um, and discernment, right? There's a time and place for everything. And at the same time, a lot of us are wage slaves, and that sucks. That takes away a lot of our time and autonomy. And there's a sacrifice we're kind of having to make in terms of time and energy for money. So, something I always caution six housers about is to be mindful of the impact that working or overworking is having on your body and on your sense of self, or whatever it is. Like, when you're constantly grinding and giving up yourself in this particular way, it does have a cost. And oftentimes that cost is, your health. So having to find balance between um, working and taking care of yourself, essentially. So I'll pause there. Let me take a look and see what y'all are saying here in the chat. I don't know if the chat is over here or over here. Link in the sidebar. If you're loving what you're hearing so far, now would be a great time for you to like the video. Let YouTube know that I am somebody who should be in the feed and that people should listen to, because that definitely helps me out and helps my channel out. All right, so we got 6th house Mars opposite 12th house Saturn. Woo! Man, I'm also in the Mars opposite Saturn club, and it's a lot of go, go, go on one end, and I can't do anything. Everything is limiting me on the other end. It can feel very all or nothing at times. So I would imagine 6th house Mars and 12th house Saturn is like doing a lot and engaging a lot of being of service to other people and constantly working, sometimes overworking, and then swinging to the other side of the pendulum. Sometimes can feel like having to slow down against your will, having to rest against your will, or just feeling stuck sometimes, like you can't really get yourself going because maybe you have a lot going on up here that's getting in the way of you being able to do things out there. So yeah, definitely feel that. And then, yeah, 6th house Mars going to war with illness. Absolutely. It's like a battle, you know? And I think sixth house Mars too, there's this feeling of like all work needs to be laborious, needs to be really taxing and just yeah, this experience of overdoing it. One thing about Mars, especially saying this as someone with a Mars ruled sixth house, is that we don't fucking know when to quit sometimes. So sometimes you need that balance with Saturn that says, hey, so this is what you have the capacity to do. And anytime you go outside of that, your body's going to let you know. And sometimes you just have to accept that you can't do and be everything to everyone all the time. Sometimes you got to look out for you as well. So I would imagine finding the balance between that, isolating and engaging, withdrawing and engaging is pretty tricky. Hey Deb, welcome in. Good to see you here live. Sixth house Mercury in Saturn. Yep. Similar dynamics too. And kind of knowing what you do for work. Yeah, obviously I've seen your chart dozens of times. Kind of makes sense there as well. The type of work that you do and everything like that, and how engaged you are with it too, and how it's a place where you're doing a lot of speaking to other people, expressing yourself to other people, and listening as well with Mercury. Hey, bestie. Hello. Welcome in. Kay says both my first and sixth house are ruled by Venus. Ooh, so Taurus rising? I believe that's the one that puts Libra in the sixth, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where is your Venus placement? I forget, but your Venus doing a lot in both of those. And it's something interesting too, just a random astro fact is that Mars and Venus are some of the only I think they're the only signs that have quincunx relationships to both of the signs that they rule. So if you put, like I said, Taurus on the first house, you're going to get Venus in the sixth, you're going to get Libra in the sixth house. And if you put Libra in the first house, you're going to get Taurus in the eighth house. So quincunx both directions. And same with Mars. If you put Scorpio in the first house, you're going to get Aries in the sixth house. But if you put Aries in the first house, you'll get Scorpio in the eighth house. Quincunx relationships. And I feel like that says a lot about Mars and Venus that I really want to sit with. Because how you got two signs that you rule and both of them contradict each other? You know? The only other placement I can think about that, or planet that I can think of that does a similar thing, is Saturn, because Aquarius and Capricorn are right next to each other. So that semi-sextile, awkward, adjacent house, 12th house relationship with each other. Yeah, being right next to each other and having very little in common, but still being Saturn ruled signs, or rather fulfilling different purposes, but both being Saturn ruled signs. Yeah, Mars, Venus, and Saturn. Very good. Is it Kalia? Let me know if that's how you say it. Kalia says Libra first house, Pisces sixth house. So this is a tricky one. Libra and Pisces is like Libra in the first house. I think about Libra as wanting everyone to come to a consensus or come to a shared agreement that's beneficial for as many people as possible. And it's consensual. So like we've all agreed that usually like this is the truth or this is the reality of something. And because we all agree, that's what makes it true. Whereas Pisces is kind of like, I hear what y'all are saying, but that doesn't feel right to me. Like something about this agreement that we all have, that, whatever this is, this reality or this situation or whatever, that this is the truth of the situation, that just doesn't feel right. Like something feels off. A great example of this is the chemical fire that just happened in Atlanta, and how the government, because usually Libra is dealing with a power dynamic of some sort, the government or the state is sending out messages to everyone that says, stay indoors, like turn your AC off, probably don't go outside, but the chlorine gas is most likely not to cause harm to anybody. Like, be careful, warning, chlorine gas everywhere, but probably not that big of a deal. And so it's like, because you're hearing from this larger organization with power and authority that, this is unlikely to be a big deal. We've all decided that this is actually probably not going to hurt you. But then you, as the Pisces, are like, okay, but why are you telling me to lock myself inside my house and turn off the air and probably don't go outside and tape my doors and windows and all of this stuff if it's not actually dangerous? Like, something about that feels off. So those two things are usually incongruent with each other. Same thing with the pandemic. And the only reason I didn't go to that explanation first is because we use it a lot, but same thing with that. They've agreed, the WHO, I mean, they haven't really agreed, but we'll say the CDC and the Biden administration and other people in power have decided that it's probably okay to catch COVID multiple times as long as you're not disabled or a child or an older person, then, immune compromised or whatever. If you don't fit into this group of people, probably okay for you to catch COVID multiple times. Just get vaccinated, no big deal. But then, you're talking to people directly, some people, not everyone, but you're saying, I don't know. I feel like each time I catch this virus, like I feel worse and worse. And it just kind of isn't adding up to me that, it's okay to get this virus multiple times when, I don't usually get the cold every year, or, I didn't used to get the flu very often, but now all of a sudden it's okay to catch COVID multiple times in one year. That seems odd. So that's kind of the Libra Pisces dynamic. So you would apply that to either the workplace, or if you've been dealing with health issues but can't get like the doctors to confirm or validate something that you're experiencing in your body. Um, Caregivers or people like that in your life, if you are trying to come to them with a feeling or an emotion that you're experiencing, and them saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way because none of the rest of us feel this way. It's that kind of a thing. So I don't know if you have any placements there. And again, guys, sorry, this is going to have a little bit more of a negative lens on it because, again, the sixth house and the first house have that itchy relationship. But I will say that it is possible for these two signs to get along and to learn from each other. It's just the process of learning from each other is uncomfortable. I think Pisces can teach Libra how to trust their bodies a little bit more and to speak up and use their words and advocate for their truth, even if everybody else disagrees. And that Pisces can also, well, really, both of those can, I think, learn those skills from each other. Learning how to use your words, learning how to trust your body, learning how to communicate in a way that is persuasive and gets people on your side or to see your perspective and to validate your perspective. Like, they have a lot they can learn from each other. And that's true for all first house, sixth house, first house, eighth house placements, I think. So uncomfortable lessons at first, of course, but they don't always stay that way. Smaje is Libra rising too. Yes, you are, boo. Bree relates. Thank you for the hugs, Kay. Yeah. Workplace trauma, as if as if laboring wasn't already an issue. Um yeah, sometimes having sixth house placements there can make it a little bit worse. Um, Deb says, yeah, so real. I had to work for myself because I couldn't deal with jobs. I mean, that's where I'm at. I can give my in person job 19 hours a week, and that's all I'm also allowed to work with the particular department that I'm in. And so, any more than that, it's enough to pay housing most of the time and maybe some bills here and there, but I got to make up the difference with my other side jobs, and I would honestly rather have that most of the time because it feels like I get to choose what I do with my time more often than not. But I know for some other people, they don't like the instability or the insecurity of like freelance work. They like the predictability and the routineness of everyday 9 to 5 job, so it really depends on you, depends on your chart and your preferences. Like, would you rather go the more creative route and be more responsible for yourself and for your income and getting it out the mud yourself, or would you rather have a predictable place that you can go to, know that all of your needs are met, but you're maybe sacrificing time and energy and a little bit of autonomy for that security? There's no right or wrong, but it's what works best for you. And for some of us, yeah, we would rather work for ourselves and figure out a way in that sense. And for others, we would rather have that security up front and know that we don't have to worry about it. Um, and for all of us, really, at the end of the day, it's all very insecure because corporations can lay you off at a moment's notice too. And that's been a harsh reality for a lot of people as well. Thinking of the sixth house as labor was helpful for me. Yep. Another one that I thought about as I was speaking was school. I've heard that school and like classes, but schools, maybe more like primary schools, elementary school, middle school, high school, could also be the sixth house because it is something that you show up to routinely in a place where you're doing work like homework and things like that, somewhere that you have a duty and an obligation to show up to, since duties and obligations also falls in the sixth house. So school, whereas I see more the larger institutions like academia, college, universities, stuff like that, studying abroad is more ninth house. And then maybe short-term certifications and trainings, um, and things like that are more sixth or more third house. So all of those different areas of life where you can learn something from somebody, gain knowledge, gain experience, and what have you, to varying degrees. Generally labor as opposed to a job specifically. Yeah, labor could look like we said, going to a job. It could look like work, but it could also look like going out to your garden and working on your garden. It could look like housekeeping, especially if you have fourth and sixth house overlays, or fourth house ruler in the sixth house rulers in the fourth house, stuff like that. It can look like housework. It can look like I said, caretaking, babysitting, pet sitting, um maintenance work, stuff like that, just studying, homework, yeah, all of that type of stuff falling into the sixth house is labor for sure. Bree also agreeing that sometimes you got to work with yourself because you can't deal with jobs. Everyone's in agreement with that. Yeah, Deb's talking about teaching today. Teaching definitely falling into the sixth house sometimes. I haven't fully decided, and maybe there's not a decision to be made, but sometimes the 11th house, I tend to see teachers because students can be in the 11th house, but I can also see teaching and students in the sixth house as well. So there must be some overlap there, that I'm curious about, that I wonder about, you know, as well. Pisces 11th house. Not sure what that was in response to, but okay. Thank you for sharing. Sixth house ruled by Scorpio. I have Mars and Virgo in the fourth house. It's giving chaotic. Yeah, can be, can be. Um, at least Scorpio and Virgo, they have a sextile relationship with one another, so they can nurture each other in the sense that Virgo, especially Mars and Virgo, can give like a discipline around routines or around regimens that make it easier to show up in the sixth house, and vice versa. Maybe the emotional boundaries that you have in the sixth house help you to trust yourself more in the fourth house. Stuff like that. They can feed each other in that way where Virgo has all of the data, and Scorpio has that the data gives Scorpio, I guess, a reason to um wait, what am I trying to say here? I feel like in this moment as I'm talking about this, that my own personal understanding of Scorpio is really biased by having Jupiter in Scorpio, because a lot of it does have to do with trusting my own body. But Scorpio in and of itself is really more about like authentic emotional expression, or rather um feeling your authentic feelings instead of masking like we would maybe do on the Taurus end. And that's not to say Taurus is always masking, but Scorpio in particular's relationship with Taurus would require a lot of masking, which can feel inauthentic. And so I think leaning more into the authenticity aspect of Scorpio and authentic emotional expression, or just emotional authenticity in general, really being the strength of Scorpio. And so there are circumstances in life that maybe our authentic emotions are not welcome or received. And so we either don't go there, don't go to those places, avoid those places and people, or we um, just stand 10 toes down in the reality of how we feel and let other people be affected by us, even if it's uncomfortable. So I do think that the Virgo aspect of trusting yourself definitely related to the emotional authenticity aspect of Scorpio there. Mhm, mhm, mhm. Sixth house moon in Libra. Hi, Becca. Welcome in. Sixth house moon in Libra. So that is Taurus rising, right? Mm. Yeah, sixth house Libra moon. Libra moons. I love me a Libra moon, by the way. Libra moon staying here. You guys are a vibe to me personally. I think a sixth house Libra moon. Yeah, I'm curious if you are a caretaker for some other people, or if you were like the oldest sibling or a sibling that had to keep the peace, maybe between your parents or between your siblings or between whoever the adults in the room were, or if you felt like you had a duty to not make things worse for whatever the situation was, to keep the peace or to at least not add to the drama. So it's a little bit more behind the scenes, a little bit more laid back, undercover. Um, People pleasing type behaviors or just being a pleaser, because if you could bring ease to whatever the situation was or calmness or get everybody to be on the same page and be more diplomatic, that was something that you were praised for a lot or acknowledged for a lot, and it helped to give you the love and acknowledgement and recognition that you wanted for being good, or easy to deal with. And at the same time, curious how much that stifled your own authentic emotional expression, thinking about Scorpio in the seventh house opposite the ascendant, but also um, the moon being in the 12th from Scorpio too. So sorry if I put all of your business out there. But that was what immediately came to mind with that placement was, yeah, like really having to manage everybody else's emotions in order to regulate your own, right? That reminds me, because I am giving y'all little mini reads. If you like what I'm chatting about here today, I would love it if you, one, shouted me out again, liked the video if you haven't already, or how do I edit my screen name? I might not be able to, but I'm gonna put my Cash App in the comments because your boy would love tips and donations if this is just really your thing and you just want to show some appreciation. No obligation, but yeah, if you're feeling called, that would really be of service to me. I am at Winifresh on Cash App and Venmo. If you're really loving this shit. I have to ask because, Anywho, let me get back into these comments, child. Cancer first house and Sag sixth house. Cancer. Oh, I just got real excited. I'm thinking about Cancer and Sag. What kind of relationship do Cancer and Sagittarius have? Hmm. And why do they beef with each other? The thing that first comes to mind, I think yesterday I mentioned fasting. Fasting is something, fasting specifically like religious fasting is something that comes to mind when I think about Cancer and Sagittarius and the beef that they have with each other, or just in general, like the ways that religion kind of has this like the desires of the flesh be cast out or whatever. Like if you were to really be embodied, you're going to hell type vibes. Um, Not to equate that with religious fasting, but just in general, like religious fasting really being that you are giving up food and the other desires of your body in order to focus on religion or focus on your spirituality or to get closer to your spirituality. And Like I said, like especially with Christianity, like the body being so demonized, like needs being so demonized in this particular way, that feeling your feelings is a sin. You know, feeling your queerness is a sin, or feeling your or giving into desire and temptation is a sin, things like that. And so being really overzealous, if you will, or kind of the zealotry of Sagittarius and being really indoctrinated sometimes into a particular set of beliefs can be antagonistic towards the immediate needs of the body, right? And then also the immediate needs of the body being antagonistic or going against whatever doctrine or belief system you might be following. Thinking about Mormonism as well, not being able to have caffeine, not being able to have, I don't know if it's sugar is one of them as well. And yeah, like things like that, how you're having to withhold from yourself basically because your belief in this thing is so strong. So it kind of ties Capricorn stuff in there too, I guess, the ways that they kind of beef with each other. But then what they could learn from each other is I would say like in what ways do what can they learn from each other? I know it's some Sag moons in the replies too, so I'm curious what y'all think about this as well. Uh what are some ways that I guess you could develop a belief system or develop a belief system around your body and your needs, or you could make it, I mean, you could develop a relationship with your body and actual needs through shifting your beliefs around those needs, I guess, or um, shifting. I don't know. I'm going to think about that and come back to it. I'm also curious what y'all think in some ways that Cancer and Sagittarius could both learn from each other and have a more harmonious relationship. Kalia, thank you. Thank you for spelling it out like that. I super appreciate it. Yeah, Jim saying they're BSing us. I'm sure speaking about authority figures lying to us about what the truth is. Kalia says Libra first house, Venus rising, um, or Venus rising sign, Chiron and Pisces, or Chiron versus sixth house, South Node. Because during this recent eclipse, I had to deal with a skin issue. I thought it was ringworm, but it actually ended up being pruritic rash, if that's how you say it. So appearance versus health. That's a good one too. I didn't even think about that. Libra and Venus in general, and the focus on appearances, how something appears to be, and especially like you said, what you thought it looked like, but going to get it checked out and what it actually was a different kind of a rash rather than ringworm. That's a fantastic example. And with having the South Node there too, I'm really curious, like what else these eclipses have been like in terms of learning how to trust your gut again in a very literal sense, like how you're creating your own consensus, your internal consensus, I guess. Like if these things are in agreement with whatever this feeling is, then this is the truth for you versus like outsourcing that to outside people. Um, outside people imposing their truths on you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That was a great example. Samaje Libra Rising says, my skin has been acting wild too. Why is the world playing with our skin? I don't know. Deb says, today was telling some psychoanalytic therapists about both neuro stuff and sidereal astrology. Love that. Love that. I really want the professional psychologists and those in the psychoanalytic fields and what's it called, neuroscience fields to get more into astrology, because we could be friends. We don't have to hate each other. It's like the astronomers, we could be friends too, but they want to cast us off into the woo woo bin, and I just hate that for us. It's okay to be a little woo woo. It's okay. Libra is about withdrawing your own conclusion or feelings to align with other people's, while Pisces is about questioning the conclusions and feelings that you feel. Love that. Very succinct. Very succinct. Yeah. Withdrawing your own conclusion to align with other people. Very Venus, very air Venus, especially considering other people's perspectives more than your own. And then Pisces, being skeptical about all of that, being like, yeah, I'm not really sure about all of that. It just doesn't feel right to me. And preferring to trust your gut, although Pisces can definitely also fall into feeling everybody else's feelings instead of their own to get a sense of what is true and real instead of just trusting their own perspective as well. So, yeah, double edged sword. Becca says this eclipse was highlighting physical fitness and how it helps my mental health. Libra 6th house, Aries 12th house, because I'm unemployed at the moment and it's driving me nuts. Oh, that's a good one. I did a Patreon post recently about embodiment through the signs and moon placements. And I remember for Aries, I was saying that physical movement is something that helps you regulate and get back into your body. So that then from there, you can do some of the other self soothing, self regulating things. And then for Libra, I think, what did I say about Libra? I'm going to look real quick because it's been a while. Join my Patreon if you haven't joined my Patreon. It's just going to be me plugging myself for the next hour every 5 minutes. Patreon.com/mixmercury. Embodiment based on the moon sign part 2. Yes. For air. For Libra, air signs achieve embodiment through the imagination, usually through engaging in mentally stimulating or creative pursuits, like me sitting up here running my mouth to all of you guys. I said more, but I'm not going to spoil it all. And I said, Venus ruled air sign. Thoughtfulness and consideration helps you feel more embodied, especially when feeling forgotten or deprioritized. Look to your own Venus placement to see what types of actions or decisions can be taken off of your hands so that you can tend to your own needs. Your needs are just as important as everyone else's, so sometimes considering yourself along with everyone else helps you arrive at a consensus that actually includes your feelings and needs too. So that's a little sneak peek for all of the Libra moons out there, if that helps you. Thank you for sharing that, Becca. Samaje says, to me, the sixth house is one of the most helpful because it's the sign or planet that shows your work ethic. Work ethic. My work ethic, yes. Absolutely, yeah. Shows, especially, I would say, especially the sign that rules it and the planet that it points to says something about your work ethic, and then the planets inside, maybe something about the people who modeled that work ethic for you, or the response that you get whenever you're doing that work ethic or something like that. Different ways that you could interpret that for sure. Me with a Mars ruled sixth house, I'm a grinder. I be grinding. I used to do too much at work all the time, very much overachiever vibes, especially with Mars, the ruler of my sixth house in Leo, and wanting recognition and validation for that, but also receiving a lot of attention and validation and pats on the head, especially from authority figures for my work ethic, which was really me self-abandoning, me self-abandoning for validation and not getting paid to be the person in charge, but also being given all of the authority like a person in charge would receive. So I'm not bitter. Becca said, yes, I had to be referee a few times between my parents. And like such a burden on a young child as well. I can definitely empathize with that. Just putting this up here as another reminder, because I said it earlier, that my Cash App and Venmo is at Winifresh with 2 H's if you'd like to show some appreciation for these lives. Eczema flare-ups, yes. That's another thing. Eczema being kind of an autoimmune disorder as well. I had eczema and still have it off and on ever since I was a baby. I get it really bad, like almost plaque psoriasis sometimes on my neck and like my scalp, on my hands, and in the creases of my arms, or sometimes the back of my knees in those places. And I would get it so bad, especially when I was an athlete, like sweating constantly, and especially like stress. Stress feels very sixth house to me. And anytime I'm like having high stress, high anxiety, or in stressful environments, if I'm not consciously aware of the stress, it shows up through my eczema like every single time. And it doesn't matter, steroid creams or whatever, nothing will get rid of it until I'm out of that environment. So ever since I've been living by myself, I haven't had it, but it used to be so bad, so irritating whenever I was younger. Kay says, this Cancer Sag. One kiddo I know who was proud to give up Happy Meals for pal is Tyne. I'm not sure what that part means, but oh, I got you. was let me read it again. This Cancer Sag. Wait, I'm so silly. Palestine. I got it. I'm smart. I caught it. This Cancer Sag, someone that I know was proud to give up Happy Meals for Palestine. So yes, perfect. Thank you for that. That really puts it into perspective. Giving up indulgences, because I think about overindulgence as something that Cancer deals with. Taurus also a little bit in a different way, but overindulging in something and giving it up in service of your beliefs, your political beliefs. I'm also thinking about Lent. Lent is another one where you give up something, give up some kind of a vice in order to focus on things that are important to you, to focus on your spirituality, to focus on your beliefs and your politics and things like that. Yeah, boycotts. Boycotting is a great example of how Cancer and Sagittarius can learn from each other, because sometimes you don't need all that shit, actually. There's a larger purpose that is worth giving up the things that you numb out on, instead of just mindlessly numbing out all of the time and not caring about the impact that your consumption has on the world. Excellent. Love that. That was so good. Oh, so appreciative of that. Thank you so much. That's so exciting. Oh, another one. Yes, I love you guys. You guys are so smart. Becca says Cancer, emotional knowledge versus Sag, which is more intellectual knowledge or spiritual knowledge, and the depths they go to understand it. Absolutely. I think that's a good one as well. I love spiritual knowledge, especially in the depths they go to understand it. And to your point, maybe Gemini for intellectual knowledge and the adjacent or semi-sextile relationship that Gemini has with Cancer as far as emotional knowledge versus intellectual knowledge, which is something I could definitely resonate with as a Gemini moon and having the moon in the 12th house from its domain. So, yes, very good. Very good. Please pull up to the Patreon. Now, I will say I'm not the most consistent with Patreon, and that's why it's so cheap. So get in while I'm still inconsistent and it's still cheap. It's only either $3 or $5 a month. I have like 74 posts up and some bonus yoga classes from whenever I was a power yoga teacher. So if you don't believe that I was really a yoga teacher and you want to try one of my really hard classes, they are on my Patreon from a couple of years ago. I think that might have even been before I was on testosterone. So you can also hear my higher pitched voice if you're curious about that. I didn't know eczema was considered an autoimmune condition. Mine is just now calming down. Yeah, it's kind of an inflammatory response of the body, so sign of inflammation, internal inflammation, but it is also autoimmune. It's related to is it the HPA axis in the body? It's related to like allergies and histamines. I think what is it? The histamine, HPA, histamine something axis. Yeah. Um, I forget all of the other aspects of it, but these fungus gnats. Um, but yeah, autoimmune condition for sure. I used to have my eczema flare ups on my arms, like in the elbow folds. Yep. Those are like the itchiest ones too. Something about the way the skin moves right there. Behind the armpits as well was another one. Child, it'd be everywhere. That reminder that it's an autoimmune disorder, so much shame wrapped up in eczema and skin issues too, for sure. For sure, for sure. Same here. It stopped when I was 16 and I stopped scratching it. So, wait, so I thought skin was more of a Saturn thing, but now all of us with these sixth house placements talking about eczema, like, is it a sixth is skin? Which house? I don't even remember. I don't have it on me right now, but which house represents skin issues? Do y'all remember? This is why I don't claim to be an expert on everything all the time because I'll be forgetting stuff. My recall sometimes is good and sometimes it's not, but very interesting that we all deal with skin issues and we're talking about sixth house as illness and diagnoses. So there's a pattern. The shame of it because you want to hide so bad sometimes, absolutely. Deb says, I was so oppositional about Lent growing up. You know what's funny is I'm not Catholic at all, but whenever Lent season rolled around, I would always participate because I just enjoyed giving something up, part of my whole Mars Saturn opposition thing. And part of the reason why I stopped drinking sugary drinks was because in high school, once I gave up all sugary drinks except for chocolate milk because I was an athlete and water. And so we were just like, had those plastic Nalgene bottles and just going ham on some water. And that was like, it was really interesting to see just how much more energy I had when I was actually staying hydrated. I've sucked at staying hydrated ever since then, but made a big difference. And then also giving up fast food one time and the way that changed my body and the amount of energy that I had as well. But yeah, also a lot of eating disorder stuff with things like that, which I won't get into, but yeah, because I didn't offer a trigger warning. Apologies there. But yeah, withhold and indulge cycles for sure. Detoxing. Feel like right now is detoxing time for real. Histamine and mast cell fuckery are central to COVID stuff. Also true. Yeah, and there are a lot of other immune disorders that deal with mast cells, especially allergy related stuff and histamines. And yeah, dealing with COVID stuff, MCAS, which I forget what it stands for, but a lot of that as a consequence, like suddenly everybody having allergies and allergy issues, even though they didn't have allergies before, could potentially be a consequence of COVID infections as well. So if you're new to experiencing allergies and you've had COVID before or multiple COVID infections, that could be part of it, part of the reason why. Mercury, not entirely sure why I guessed that. I mean, I think, is Mercury related to skin stuff? I don't know. Intuitively, I don't think so. I think if I remember correctly, it is Saturn that deals with skin stuff, but um ooh. Oh, mast cell activation syndrome for MCAS. I mean, that you might be right. Sometimes the answer really is that obvious, huh? That could definitely be true. This gnat wants to die. Yes, MCAS is mast cell activation syndrome. Yep. And you can get that. Something that I didn't realize, but that I learned from other autistic people on Twitter who were talking about this was that um, leftovers, like food leftovers, if you usually don't like leftovers, have an aversion to leftovers, and sometimes frozen foods or food that is not like that was not just prepared, histamines build up in food after it's been cooked and it's been sitting, even if it's refrigerated. That was not something that I knew. So if you have an aversion to takeout and you're neurodivergent, there's probably a relationship to that. And also, I think something about autism being related. And by when I say related, I don't mean cause, but there's a relationship between mast cells and some things with autism too. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but I remember hearing something about that as well. Or maybe the sensitivity to mast cells and or something like that. I'm definitely butchering it, but look into it because there's some kind of a connection with that as well. Okay, scrolling back up. It's possibly sixth house because of illnesses and disorders in the physical sense. I mean, yeah, I guess I'm overthinking it, but these are sixth house things, right? when we say it's illness, like it doesn't always have to mean something that's immediately going to kill you. Sometimes it's something as simple but chronic and ongoing as eczema or food allergies, food intolerances, and things like that, especially because of the connection to the gut, which I think somebody else said here. Yeah, skin tells you about the gut. Absolutely. Sometimes dairy and wheat or gluten or different wheat allergies and stuff like that can also cause skin flare ups. Um, why didn't they cover this in schools? I know. This is also very much in the wagon of me having. Actually, yeah, I'm going to talk about this. So, a lot of my. Here's the thing I can share about myself. I have um, undiagnosed OCD, but OCD in the sense of like obsessions and compulsions in the very literal sense is something I mask a lot, especially in person. It's not something that you would know about me because I really don't like to show it. I can talk about it, but I really like when I'm activated and experiencing a fixation on something, like I really would rather not be seen. So it's very Scorpio of me. But I've dealt with a level of obsessive compulsive disorder, especially around hygiene and cleanliness, particularly whenever it comes to food and eating. And so there's a little bit of emetophobia that comes with that, that I've struggled with my entire life, and a lot of anxiety as well around like washing my hands enough. There's sometimes that I've touched my face, but if I'm like not at home and in a comfortable place, I won't touch my face, won't touch my mouth. I won't eat food with my hands without washing my hands first. Hand sanitizer is not good enough for me. Oh my gosh, this gnat, please let me live. um, but yeah, very neurotic in that sense whenever it comes to like cleanliness and illness, because I don't like me getting sick, especially with something like if it were to be, I'm not even going to name it all because I already feel a little triggered just talking about it. But the whole like, but I didn't do the compulsions and then the thing happened. So I'm like, let me stop while I'm ahead. But those are things that are very sensitive for me. And so it makes it very hard for me to be in relationship with people, Venus in the sixth house in Scorpio, to be in close, intimate relationships with people because now I can't, there are a lot of things that are out of my control, which includes other people and other people's hygiene habits. And so, with one to one intimate relationships, it is something that is tricky to navigate in relationships. I definitely prefer to have partners who are also somewhat neurotic about cleanliness in some kind of a way so they can at least understand. And also, other neurodiverse relationships tend to work well for me because I don't have to over explain all of my neurotic and obsessive and compulsive tendencies and fixations. But it was something that caused me, and less so today, but caused me a lot of distress as a kid. Drove my parents insane, I'm sure. Let me not say that. Drove my parents really frustrated and potentially stressed out my parents because they didn't know how to help me. And there was nothing, they knew there was nothing that they could tell me that would help me feel relief. But yeah, so I tend to get really neurotic about things like that whenever it comes to eating, especially. And it makes it hard to enjoy things. A lot of times there's always a preoccupation about like, I hope this doesn't make me sick. I hope this was clean. How was it prepared? Did they wash their hands? Were they using gloves? Going out to eat at restaurants is like my least favorite thing because I've worked in restaurants and I know how dirty they can be. So it's just like, um, better now that I'm a little bit older and I'm on testosterone now, which helps with anxiety a lot and surprisingly helped with OCD thought patterns a lot as well. Um, Along with somatic therapy and other things that have helped me just deal with the anxiety loops that I can get stuck in. But that's also something very sixth house for me that again was a source of shame and a source of not wanting other people to see that about me or know that about me. And also something that I think other people misinterpret a lot because I'm not explaining it to them. But if I were to just explain it, it probably would not be so weird, but definitely something a lot of people don't understand or don't relate to. So it's a source of alienation for me as well. But all of that to say, the gut and the sixth house thing is kind of like I get knots in my stomach to where I can't eat so bad whenever I'm having really bad anxiety. And also like only being able to eat certain foods or getting fixations on certain foods sometimes because that's the only thing that I can tolerate at the moment, and stress being related to the gut and all that type of stuff. That's why I always tell my sixth housers, like, if you experience a lot of stomach problems that you can't directly relate to something as far as like food allergies or intolerances and things like that, like it's probably something stressful in your environment or work environment. And bonus, if you deal with a lot of acid reflux, did you know that acid reflux is actually caused by a lack of stomach acid in your stomach because of all of the stress that you're under? You produce less stomach acid, and so then whenever you go to eat, your body tries to overcompensate for the lack of stomach acid with stomach acid on top of your food instead of putting it in the gut before you eat so that digestion can start early. And so what can help sometimes is like ginger, like raw ginger, chewing on raw ginger before meals, warm lemon water in the mornings, apple cider vinegar, if you can stand the taste of it, apple cider vinegar shots can help. But you actually want to increase your natural stomach acid production so that you can properly digest your food. Sixth house dealing with digestion. And one of the worst things you can do, even though it does alleviate the symptoms up front, is to take antacids. I used to live off of antacids whenever I was little because my acid reflux was so bad. And all it does is mask the symptoms and decrease. Well, I won't definitively say it decreases your body's ability to produce stomach acid, but it does decrease the stomach acid, which just perpetuates the problem. So, yes, temporary relief, but can prolong the issue much longer. So, digestive enzymes might be your friend for a little while instead of probiotics if probiotics haven't been working for you. And acidic fruits, especially like pineapple. Pineapple is usually the bromelain, and pineapple is what they use for a lot of digestive enzymes, and I believe papaya enzymes as well. So fruits like that sometimes. And also the order in which you eat foods. I could go on, but these are all other things that I've also learned as a result of having to take my health and wellness into my own hands. Again, Mars ruled sixth house. So bet y'all didn't know y'all were coming here for that. Just some more extra Gemini knowledge that is in my head that I've acquired over the years of trying to figure out what the fuck my body is doing. um Makes sense because the skin is a telltale sign of your gut and how the gut connects to your brain. Makes me think about your mind body connection. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um um Oh, I see. That's what you were responding to, Kalia. Yeah, it's they're very much connected. Your gut is your, they call it your second brain, but they're really interconnected in more ways than we thought. Another fun fact. Um so for all of my psilocybin enjoyers out there, magic mushroom people, did you know that psilocybin, magic mushrooms, psychedelics, not all psychedelics, but I know psilocybin for sure, increases serotonin production in the gut. So, like, yes, it does all of the fun things to your brain, but it also increases serotonin production in your gut. And the serotonin, I think, somebody tell me if this is true or not, or, if you know that this is true or not. I believe a lot of serotonin, majority of your serotonin is actually produced in your gut, and that's what contributes to a lot of mental health as well. So not just in your brain, but also in your gut. And when there's a lack of serotonin production in the gut lining, and by gut I mean like your small intestines, I believe. Um, that's why like some mood disorders sometimes are associated with gut dysbiosis. So probiotics can't always solve that problem necessarily. There's still a lot of research being done in that area, but they are finding a lot of connections, very literal connections between like neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut and your mental health. I'm really wearing my sixth house badge today. I didn't know I was going to have this much to say about it. Why didn't they cover this in schools? Because they don't want us to be great. They just want us to throw a pill at it and fix it. And yes, Deb has a link to MCAS stuff. Lactose intolerance since birth was very tied to eczema too. I wonder how all of this affects your intuition. I love this question. I love this question. So I'll say this for me because for me, I do have, like I said, Jupiter and Scorpio in the sixth house. And Jupiter and Scorpio, very similar to Jupiter and Pisces, where Jupiter would be at home in a water sign. So I feel like those two placements are very similar sometimes, as well as like Mars and Pisces too on the other end. So I think about it like this. You know how a lot of people will ask the question, like, is it anxiety or is it my intuition? You know, like trying to differentiate what is anxiety versus what is intuition. I think this is kind of a real time thought or real time verbalization, but I think that anxiety is when your intuition goes unvalidated for a really long time. And I say that because sometimes, well, maybe I'll asterisk that and I'll say sometimes anxiety is when your intuition has gone unvalidated. And it's because usually, like, feeling anxiousness or feeling anxiety, unless you do genuinely have a disorder, is a sign that you are not okay with something that's going on, or that you are expecting something to happen as a result of experiences you've had previously. Right? So the anxiety isn't necessarily coming from nowhere, and it's not always just all in your head, unless, like I said, you do genuinely have a disorder. Um, and even that, like I could talk about that too, but anxiety is kind of like, I think about anxiety as being a Scorpio trait, and we all have a Scorpio house somewhere, right? So it's something we all experience. And it's like partially, yes, a lack of control, like experiencing this feeling of a lack of control and fear combined, and that you're anticipating something, a particular outcome, or anticipating something happening in the future, which is why it feels like it's out of your control. Right. And as many of you know, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety when I was really young. I don't know if that's actually the truth or if I was just neurodivergent in other ways, but anxiety is another thing I've learned about a lot. But the whole reason my anxiety started was because of thunderstorms. I grew up in Tornado Alley. We would get tornadoes all the time. I could go outside and watch one drop down into a field, you know? So it's not like my anxiety was unprecedented or unreasonable. I'm looking at a tornado. Why wouldn't I be anxious? Or there's like baseball sized hail, golf ball sized hail coming down on the roof, making loud noises. Why wouldn't I be anxious? But my parents, because they weren't afraid, would always tell me, and I got Pisces ass parents, but they would always tell me, if we're not worried, then you don't need to be worried. You know, so just don't worry. And I'd be like, but I'm worried. What if a tornado comes and sweeps down our house? Like it wouldn't be unheard of. It's happened before. What if something bad happens that's out of my control? And it was like nobody could ever help me figure out how to deal with my anxiety in that sense. And so it became an emotional habitual pattern for me where I just always felt anxious. Like anxious was just a go-to feeling for me that was familiar and in a weird way, I don't know how to explain, gave me a sense of control because that's how I rationalized it as a child. You know, when you're a child, you just rationalize things that maybe aren't always logical. But that experience of like, okay, like you're anticipating something happening. Sometimes like intuition is like because of these experiences you've had previously and because of this pattern that you're witnessing or that you've experienced where every time I'm in this type of a situation, this is usually the outcome. Like intuition usually comes from repeated experiences. Otherwise, how would you intuitively know something is going to happen? That doesn't just come from nowhere. that gut feeling doesn't just come from nowhere. It's because you have a suspicion that something is a little too familiar. And last time I was in this situation, something bad happened. Now, again, there are definitely ways to blow that out of proportion. And now you are seeing a bad thing happening in every situation. And that's not necessarily intuition either. But if there is a way that you can come into right relationship with your own anxiety, then your anxiety can be a guide that says, oh, I need to get out of here because every time I'm in this situation, my stomach is in knots. There must be something going on here that I'm not okay with. And sometimes the solution is to get the fuck out of there. And sometimes the solution is to just say, like, hey, I don't like that. This is making me uncomfortable, depending on the situation. Or just asking a question to get clarity on something that you're anticipating or that you suspect so that you can find out what the reality of the situation is. So if your gut is disrupted to a point where, you can't even trust what it is that it's telling you, I think learning how to tolerate that sensation is one thing that helps so that so that you can kind of move out of the pattern of defaulting to anxiety in every situation. And then the second thing being like actually asking yourself, or actually asking or like surveying the situations where anxiety shows up for you, so that you have an association with those sensations. And it may not just be a gut feeling, or the tight knot in your stomach feeling, or anxiety. It could be a different feeling or sensation that you always get when you're around someone. Like if you always get sleepy around somebody, that might be a sign that you feel comfortable around them and that they feel safe to you. It could also be a stress response, just depending on the person. You might always get a headache every time that you go to work, and it could be because work stresses you out. It could also be because your job has terrible ventilation and the CO2 levels are high. Both of those would be things that are pretty consistent, with having a headache. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about not ignoring the sensation. And that's why like somatic focused therapies can be really helpful in learning to tolerate certain emotions. That way you have a relationship with that sensation in your body versus just totally blowing it off and not taking it seriously, or learning how to consider it a little bit more often. And that, my friends, is how you build trust with yourself, by giving yourself the attention and the validation, or receiving that from somebody else whenever you've gone a long time without having it. It helps you feel like, okay, I know what this is and I know how to respond to it. And the inner child inside of you can give the adult version of you a hug and say, thank you so much for listening to me and for protecting me, because I had no idea what the fuck was going on. I'm just a child. So thank you for saying that, and for letting me go on that rant. So another reminder, if you're having a great time and this is going well for you, please like the video if you haven't already, and subscribe to tune into more lives. I'm going to start to try to wrap it up here, as it's almost been an hour and a half. And as much as I can do this all day, I need to rest because I have an 8-hour day at my in-person job tomorrow. Thank you for being vulnerable. You are so welcome. Thank you for listening and holding space. Evil gnat, yes, very evil. There's a ton of them. A bunch of fungus gnats have intercepted one of my plants, and I need to get on those mosquito dunks very soon. Raw ginger, lemon water, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, thank you. Ooh, okay. So also mast cell support can include both H1 and H2 antagonists, like H1, which is Zyrtec, H2 like Pepsid. I will take extra digestive enzymes with H2 mast cell stuff. Probiotics can flare you, but they're low histamine probably. Yeah, I appreciate that. I have also heard, as we were talking about COVID earlier, an option for COVID treatment, since we don't have official treatment, especially if you can't get Paxlovid, is these H1 and H2 antagonists that Deb is talking about. Pepsid is one that I've heard a lot. And I don't know if Benadryl is one, but Zyrtec, yes, and any other antihistamines, those can help with COVID symptoms and COVID recovery as well. Mushy's got my stomach together. Mine too. Microdosing a low amount has actually been helpful in getting my stomach together. And I like to try those every so often as a little reset. Serotonin, yes, production in the gut. And if you don't methylize folate, it impacts serotonin. Good to know. Um, yeah, I saw something about that recently with folic acid and folate being two different things. Folic acid being the synthetic version of folate, and methylated folate or something like that being easier for the body to process. So, something to think about with your vitamins. Becca says, I ask anxiety versus intuition all the time. A gut feeling, I don't really resonate with that. I don't know if it's because I have 8th house Neptune, but it's always tricky for me. For sure, for sure. Me too. Thank you so much for being here, Deb. It was good to see you. Thank you for participating in the chat. Have a wonderful day. Sometimes it's random feelings that overcome me, and I do this internal investigation until I arrive close enough to certainty. Pisces rising, I guess. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're not going to come to the conclusion immediately, right? Sometimes you do have to do an internal inventory and like ask yourself some questions, or to really sit with the feeling to even feel what the feeling is in the first place. And especially for Pisces, like make sure it's your own feelings that you're feeling and that you're not trying to feel what everybody else is feeling as a clue of how you should be feeling. Because I know a lot of people deal with that as well. Becca says, thank you for highlighting different sensations that can show up in your body. Lately, I've been saying I'm in intuition school and trusting myself, so that was helpful. Thank you. Absolutely. It can be all kinds of sensations. Some other ones that I like to think about is holding tension in your shoulders, especially in your traps or in your neck. Clenching your jaw is another one. If you're a teeth grinder at night, I definitely am. And sometimes in your hips is another one. Usually anywhere around your joints, like your major joints, shoulders and hips. But holding tension in your in your glutes or in your thighs is another one. Just clenching in general, not realizing you're holding tension, and especially feeling that in the gut as well is usually the most obvious one. And Bree says, you are the best. You're the best, bestie. Bestie and besties. So, all right. I feel like this is about as in depth as you can get into the 6th house. So, I'm going to call it a night. Thank you so much to everyone who showed up to my live today. I am your in house astrologer, Astro Himbo, wait, your in house astrologer, Mixed Mercury, the Astro Himbo, Sky Daddy, Divine Mirror, and Astrotherapist. Thank you so much. I hope to see you all tomorrow. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about, but it will definitely be later in the day, possibly later in the evening, because I will be at work all day, and I'll have to cook when I get home. So I'm going to guess around 7 p.m. tomorrow, Central Standard Time. Maybe we'll talk about the 12th house. And that'll be the last of our difficult houses series. So thank y'all so much. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.